Hi, everyone. Welcome to Business and Politics. I'm Joseph Lavoie, and today we're going to be talking about the impact of the growing interventionist nature of politics and regulatory environments. Last week, the UK government published its long promised package of reforms to workers' rights. It's billed as the biggest overhaul to employment law in a generation. We're talking 28 policies that do things like make parental leave available from day one of employment, introducing a probation process that for the first time will be put on a statutory footing. That means effectively a probation period will get capped at 9 months. Things like the current 2-year qualifying period for protection against unfair dismissal terms that will come to an end. These are types of measures that are being billed as very good for workers. But as always, there's some trade-offs that have to be made. And in this context, and we're seeing this around the world in multiple markets, often as governments move towards applying a stricter regulatory regime, small business owners, small businesses end up having to deal with the costs of implementing those changes. And they are, as a result, more likely to struggle under the cost of red tape. We've seen this in Canada. CFIB has long reported that the smallest businesses bear a disproportionately high burden of the cost and often pay up to 5 times more per employee than larger businesses do on a regulatory compliance. This is the challenge with a growing regulatory environment. They are designed for large firms. Large companies can afford to deal with the more interventionist nature of politics today. They can deal with the growing burden of regulatory compliance because they've got the resources for it. But most small businesses don't. They can't afford to operate in an increasingly interventionist political environment. But if you're a small business owner, I do think there's some good news for you. You do wield political influence. You just may not realize it yet. Here's why I think you, as a small business owner, can still be politically relevant and carry political influence today. First of all, being that you're small. Being nimble and small, obviously in a business context, has tons of advantages. But in a populist environment, populist political environment, like the ones we are dealing with now in multiple jurisdictions here in Canada and around the world, it also presents you with an advantage because many decision makers want to hear from fresh voices. They don't necessarily want to hear from the same traditional industry stakeholder voices. That means you and the relationship that you have with your customers is a huge advantage because you represent likely more Main Street than you do Bay Street or Wall Street. And that means you can, on day one, get agency and an audience with decision makers probably more easily, frankly, than a lot of standard industry players can. So you're small. That's an advantage. You're also retail. I don't mean necessarily that you're in the business of B2C work, but the fact that often as a small business owner, you're much closer to your customers than larger organizations may be, because obviously your entire living depends on it. That means you're dealing with the same end audience that a political decision maker is, right? Good elected officials come into the constituency on weekends. They go door knocking. They make face-to-face contact with voters because that's the best way for them to stay on top of the pulse. And that's what ultimately wins elections, is the relationships that they have with their voters. Well, you have an ability to build similarly strong relationships with your customers, who are in turn the voters that elected officials depend on to retain power. So build a relationship with your customers. Do so in the context of them as a voter, and you will soon discover that you have a gateway to elected officials. You're also, I'd say the last thing about a small business owners, you're part of the community. You know, many small business owners sponsor sports teams. They're very active. They do charitable work. They take on leadership roles in the community. And when you are of the community, from the community, and for the community, that means you carry community influence. And if you carry community influence, you carry political influence. It means you are someone who has the capacity to represent the views of people around you in your community. And that means you can get an audience with your local official. And that's the last thing I would say is, as a small business owner, don't worry about the big picture. Start local. Build the relationships you need to with the elected officials that represent you and your community, and you'll discover how powerful that can be in helping you build a movement of advocates for you in the regulatory system.